Professor Tathagata Roy is a politician, author, educator, and patriot, besides being professionally a civil engineer and an expert on engineering contracts. He was born on 14 September 1945 in Kolkata to Debesh Chandra and Anila Roy. He had a distinguished academic career, having been a rank holder in the school living examination and a Jagadish Bose National Science Talent Search Scholar. He studied civil engineering in Bengal Engineering College, Shivpur, now Indian Institute of Engineering, Science and Technology, Shivpur, and law in the University of Calcutta. After graduation, he joined Indian Railways Service of Engineers and worked as general manager and as chief engineer design of the Kolkata Metro project. He took voluntary retirement from the railways in 1990 and joined Jadavpur University, professor and founder head of the Department of Construction Engineer. Professor Roy was felicitated as an eminent engineering personality by the Institution of Engineers India and awarded the Distinguished Alumni Award by his alma mater, Indian Institute of Engineering, Science and Technology, Shivpur. Professor Roy was attracted towards Hindutva and became a Swayamsevak in 1986. After leaving government service, he joined BJP in 1990. He served as the state president of BJP West Bengal from 2002 till 2006 and as a member of the BJP National Executive from 2002 till 2015. He was appointed Governor of Tripura in May 2015. Then he transferred and appointed Governor of Meghalaya in August 2018. He is a famous nationalist writer on socio-political subjects. His full-length books are My People Uprooted, The Exodus of Hindus from East Pakistan and Bangladesh, Shyam Prasad Mukherjee, Life and Times, and their Bengali version respectively. Both versions being by the author himself, under the title Apratima Nayak, Dr. Shyam Prasad Mukherjee. His latest one in Bengali is Ja Chilo Dabab Desh, Bharat Kesari. Apart from these, he has written innumerable articles and pamphlets and has been published in respective journals. Professor Roy is married, father of 2 married daughters, and grandfather of 3 grandchildren.
I am indeed honored to be invited to speak at this August webinar, which will discuss, in which we will discuss the anniversary of Swami Vivekananda's Chicago address, which was held on 11th of September 1893. A country which has been independent for the last 70 odd years and is considered one of the world powers. It is difficult to imagine what a feat it was for Swami Vivekananda to be able to go to Chicago and speak over there. In order to explain the enormity of his venture, let me just run through very briefly Swami Vivekananda's life. He was born the son of a rich attorney, but as things happen, as soon as his father died, they become almost paupers. So much so that sometimes they didn't have enough to eat at home. And Swami Vivekananda, sometimes knowing that there was nothing to eat at home, he used to come home and tell his mother that he had eaten dinner at a friend's place where he had been invited. And then the whole night he lay fasting. This was the situation. In such a situation, he happened to go to Dakshineshwar and was attracted to the seer, Thakur, the one that we call Thakur Ramakrishna, Paramahansa. and immediately took to him. And thereafter, he became a steadfast disciple of Thakur Ramakrishna and stayed with him until he left this worldly body. And finally, after he left, Swami Vivekananda got out of his uh, temporary dwelling and decided to travel right through the country. He traveled without a penny in his pocket. In fact, he didn't even have a pocket. So you can imagine what it was like. Depending entirely on condition. But he finally, God had uh, ordained more important things for him. All the major religions of the world were invited, but Hindus were not invited.
Your voice is breaking.
Somebody is speaking in the middle. My voice is breaking?
Yes.
I don't know why that is happening.
Okay.
But, in India and from the is now in Rajasthan, and with the help from them, he set sail for the United States, reached the country. Then he wanted to go. He had to go to Chicago. Somebody is speaking in the middle. Please, this is very disturbing. He had intended to go to Chicago, and he had an introduction to a person. But when he reached Chicago, he found that he had lost the letter that he was given. So he was just moving around aimlessly on the streets of Chicago in the dead cold. Chicago is a very cold city, even in September. In that time, an American lady who was not a Hindu, obviously, she was a Christian. She saw something in the looks of this person. She called him in and then gave him enough to eat and gave him the introduction to the Parliament of Religions. Then he went to the Parliament of Religions. He had not been invited. And the important thing is that he was not from an independent country. India then was a British colony. People did not know anything about India. Americans were particularly ignorant. A whole lot of them thought that tigers and elephants roamed the streets of India, even in the cities, and Indians live in caves, that kind of thing. But Swamiji, undeterred by all these prejudices, he reached the venue of the Parliament of Religions and introduced himself. And the organizers again saw something in his visage to admit him, although he had not been invited. And when he got up to speak and he addressed the whole gathering with the words, "Sisters and brothers of America," there was such a thunderous applause for almost 2 minutes that he could not speak another word. Then he delivered his speech. It was a memorable speech, but that is understating it. Through that one speech, which he delivered at Chicago on the 11th of September 1893, he introduced the greatness of Hinduism and the greatness of India to a Western audience who had no idea of it. He told them that our civilization is thousands of years older than yours. When you were living on trees, we were calculating the distance from the earth to the sun. We were that advanced. And this was possible only because we were under the, we belonged to Sanatana Dharma. And then, as a result of this lecture and the Parliament of Religions, Swamiji got a lot of disciples in the United States. He traveled in different parts of the United States. He went to the Thousand Islands in the Great Lakes, or in the border between the United States and Canada. Then he came to Europe. Then in Europe, he made some more disciples and he gathered money with which he could start his institution, the great institution, the Ramakrishna Mutt and Mission. This process began in 1893, and Swamiji breathed his last in 1902. So can you imagine just in 9 years what a person can do? In these 9 years, he had made disciples all over the Western world, particularly in the United States and in the English-speaking parts of Europe, England and certain other countries. Then he came back to India. He lectured from Colombo to Almora. All these lectures have been encapsulated in a book, and I strongly recommend that all of you read that book to understand what Swamiji was all about and what he said. Now, after that, he founded this institution. Even in founding this institution, he had come across a lot of trouble. He had come across the objection that Hindus could not get together and it was impossible to have an institution. He came across the objection that this was a poor imitation of what the Christians are doing. But he was not deterred. He founded this institution which now has branches all over the world and innumerable ones in India. It even had branches in Pakistan which no longer exist, of course, because of the prejudices of the government of that country. But it still has a lot of branches in Bangladesh and in various Western countries. In India, I have visited, I am an initiated disciple of Ramakrishna Mutt and Mission. I was given the initiation by Swami Prabhananda ji, and I have visited a large number of these ashrams. The most memorable one that I had visited, the one that I would recommend all of you to visit, is one called Mayavati, which is in Uttarakhand, which is a ashram dedicated to the meditation of the Advaita. Advaita is the philosophy which was created by Shankara, which postulates that there is no difference between the person who is worshipping and the deity who is worshipped. So that is why there is no vigraha, or there is no image in this ashrama. The ashrama stands all by itself with this majestic view of the Nanda Devi mountain of the Himalayas. Anyway, I am digressing. The point is, Swami Vivekananda's that one speech that he delivered in Chicago had blasted to pieces all the misconceptions that the Westerners had about India and had about the Sanatana Dharma. Imagine what a great task it was for a person from a British colony to go uninvited to across the seas and so far away to deliver a lecture and change the course of the world, so to say, doing it. He could do it only because he had the Ashirvad, the blessings of Thakur Ramakrishna, and it is only because of that divine blessing that he could do it. Today, we are proud Hindus, largely as a result of his efforts. And subsequently, what was done is that the other organization that we are all proud to belong to, that is Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. It has a very close connection with Swami Vivekananda. How? I'll explain in very briefly. The Adi Sarsanchalak, that is Dr. Hedgewar, who had founded the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, he did his study of medicine in Kolkata, known as Calcutta at that time, in Calcutta, and there he came across the thoughts of Swami Vivekananda. That is how he was influenced. But more direct than that was the influence of the Ramakrishna Matan mission on the next Sarsang Chalak. That is our Param Pujaniya Guruji Golwalkar. Guruji Golwalkar, before becoming the Swayamsevak and a Pracharak, he had been a professor of zoology in Banaras Hindu University. But he was of the ascetic type, and he left his job and he came and joined the Ramakrishna mission. And in the Ramakrishna mission, he became a disciple of Swami Akhandanandaji. Swami Akhandanandaji was a direct disciple of Thakur Ramakrishna. And Swami Akhandanandaji at that time was working in an ashram called Sargachi in the district of Murshidabad in West Bengal, where he was mostly doing famine relief. And this was in line with Swami Vivekananda's teaching, Jiva Jnane Shiva Seva. Shiva Jnane Jiva Seva. Before that, Hindu beliefs used to center on the supposition that if a person is suffering in this janam, in this incarnation, that is a result of something wrong that he did in a previous incarnation. But Swamiji rubbished it, and Swamiji said that it is the job of every holy person in Sanatana Dharma to serve humanity, and that is what he called Shiva Jnane Jiva Seva. That is, serve humanity as if you are serving Lord Shiva. So this is how Guruji Golwalkar had his initial training, and he was told by Akhandanandaji that this is not your place, you have got to go and work among the people. But he didn't leave. He left only after Akhandanandaji left this mortal world. Then he went to the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, became the Sarsang Chalak in 3 years and worked wonders. Anyway, that is a different matter. But coming back to Swamiji, we are here, we are proud Hindus, we are proud to belong to the Sanatana Dharma only because of Swamiji, and remembering the memorable speech that he had delivered in Chicago on the 11th of September 1893, I do my pranams, Swamiji, and please bless all of us, please bless Swadeshi Sangha, Bande Mataram, Bharat Mata Ki.
So Swami Vivekananda told that to what Shiv Jnane Jiva, uplift the poor, untouchables, and illiterates and uneducated people, and the service to do service to the poor as Narayan. That was his vision, and that was dharma to him. So, but the modern, those who are these Dalit activists or Ambedkarites or some subaltern historians, they never highlight the thoughts of Swami Vivekananda and his inspiring teaching of Daridra Narayan Seva. So why this dichotomy? So what do you think that why this intellectual dishonesty from these activists?
It's really very simple. What Swami Vivekananda advocated was total removal of all these differences between different castes or people of different professions. and the people who you are talking about, they are the ones who want those distinctions so that they can create their own political banks. You see, if the differences vanish, then they won't have any political bank. They want a political vote bank defined by certain barriers, preserving those barriers, not removing them.
So that follow-up question has come from Canada because it is in my mobile. I'm just telling. So the previous question was there that people are attacking from outside. But the thing is that what about the change of demography? So changing of the demography is a very common in India, and during undivided India we have lost Kandahar, Kabul, Sindh, and currently also the way one particular religion peoples are growing. So they need not to attack only for their birth rate. They will become majority, and our country will be. That Hindu will be minority. So the question is that whether our current state of constituency, whether it can stop the changing of the demography in India, and which will not cause the genocide what had happened in 46 and 71. So this is the question to you, Dada.
We must meet this problem head on instead of trying to beat about the bush. You are talking about a particular community. Why don't you say Muslims? What stops you from saying Muslims? We know that it is the Muslims who are trying to do it. They are Hindus. Why don't you say it out loud? Why don't you say it in public? I said, why don't we say it out loud? Why don't we say it in public that it is the Muslims who are trying to take over, who are trying to outpopulate us?
Yeah, that is correct. But the question, the way it has asked, I have given here. So it is correct.
The point is that first we must recognize the problem and we must talk about it without having any kind of lid over it. If we ourselves are trying to be euphemistic, if we ourselves try to put a lid on what we are saying, try to be ultra careful, we'll never get the job done.
Question has come that asking that what is the difference between Hindutva and Rashtriyatva and cultural nationalism?
There is no difference. These are all different facets of the same thing. Hindutva, Rashtriyatva, and cultural nationalism. A little while back, Sunil Dewdharji explained it very succinctly. He said that when we Indians go abroad and someone is a Christian, he says, I'm an Indian Christian. Someone is a Muslim, he says, I'm an Indian Muslim. But when a Hindu goes, he says, I'm Indian. So Indianness and Hindutva are one and the same thing. There is no difference. These are all different facets of the same thing.
My name is Ritik Saha, and I work for one of the MNCs here in Bangalore. So my question to you is, Swamiji had worked towards abolishing fanatism. And fanatism in all forms, right? It's not just about the society. We are talking about in all forms. But today, if you look at our society, there is a certain section of people who are trying to look at dominating the society. In order to dominate the society, they are trying to ensure that there are more and more Hindu people are getting converted, right? So they're trying to convert our Hinduisms. So what is your take on abolishing fanatism?
Where exactly did Swamiji say that we must abolish fanaticism? See, fanaticism is not something that Swamiji invented. It had been there for a very long time. And it is still existing there, and we are suffering from it. A Hindu cannot be a fanatic. You try to understand this, please. A Hindu, by definition, cannot be a fanatic. A religion which admits of a male god, a female god, a child god, which admits of one God, three gods, 330 million gods, or even no God. Can such a religion be fanatic? It is impossible for such a religion to be fanatic. It is only those religions who can be fanatic who believe in one God, one book, and one prophet. And if they are fanatic, we have got to meet them head on. That is what I was trying to explain in the answer to the previous question.
To what extent Swamiji is admired today as a person among the Indian youths?
I can tell about my own province, that is Bengal, to which you also presumably belong. If you ask anyone in West Bengal, name three greatest Bengalis, or someone will say Rabindranath, someone will say Subhash Chandra Bose, someone might even say S.N. Satyendranath Bose, but nobody will talk about skipping Swamiji, because he is an icon who has transgressed time. He is an icon who in just 39 years of his life, he had chalked out such immutable principles that he has remained relevant, and he will remain relevant for all times to come. So yes, he is relevant. Some people have been subjected to wrong education. West Bengal has been suffused by leftism for a very long time, principally because the principal opposition, that is Congress, they have left the field vacant, and the cultural and the literary field was left vacant for the leftists, and they had taught us wrong values. They had taught us a philosophy which the whole world has rejected today. So we have to re-educate them. But meanwhile, nobody can reject the value of Swamiji. Have you ever seen the worst communist ever criticizing Swamiji? They won't. They even criticize Subhash Chandra Bose today. Even criticize Rabindranath. But have you seen any communist criticizing Swamiji? They won't. Because he is one person who has transgressed all time.
Yes.
Yes, please. Please.
I am Kalyan Pandey, Associate Professor of English, Baluhat College, and I'm very happy to have a talk with you and exchange my view on the points selected for this webinar. My question is that it is perception that Indian cannot be kept detached from Hinduism because it predominates Indian culture and acts as a cementing force to keep India and Indians united. The gravity of eroding situation of Indian culture in the form of values and morality is a direct threat to Indian nationalism and national unity. My question is, how much do the study and dissemination of Swami Vivekananda's philosophy relevant to the reinstallation and reinforcement of rationalistic feeling into Indian to protect Indian culture and Indian nationalism? Because Indian nationalism is intimately connected with Indian culture.
See, you have given the answer yourself that first thing, it is very relevant, and secondly, it has got to be taught. In answer to the previous question, I had said that even the worst detractor of Swami Vivekananda, the communists, they have not been seen as abusing Swamiji. So we have got to teach Swamiji's lessons, the truths that Swamiji taught us, and we have got to give them to our youth, and that is the only way out in order to inculcate nationalism and respect for religion, respect for humanities. As I understand.
Yes, I'm Chandrachud Goswami. I'm from Kolkata, and I want to ask Mr. Tathagata Roy that Swamiji said that time of demons has come to an end. But still today we see the presence.
আসরিক শক্তি শেষ
Oh,
হয়ে গেছে
time of demons has come to an end. No, no.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Swamiji might have said, I have not come across that particular utterance of Swamiji, but I would say that it has not come to an end. Swamiji might have predicted that at some stage it will come to an end, but it has not come to an end. We see ourselves the sort of thing that is happening, the sort of thing that the Islamic State did, the sort of thing that was done on 9/11, 7/7, in Mumbai in 26/11. We have seen this. These were the work of demons, killing innocent people. So it has not come to an end, and I don't think Swamiji said exactly that.
So the question is, what should we do to bring awareness and preserve our culture, as today's generation is so fascinated towards Western ways?
See, there is no conflict between Western ways and Swamiji's teaching. There is conflict between Swamiji's teaching and atheism with Marxism, Maoism, Marxism, Leninism. What we call Western ways are basically only some external manifestations of life, how people enjoy themselves, or what sort of music they want to hear, what sort of dances they want to dance. But there is no conflict between that and what we understand Swamiji's teaching to be. There is conflict with Marxism, and that is what we have got to combat. Marxism is a philosophy which has been rejected by the whole world. It has been thrown into the dustbin, garbage heap of history. But certain parts of India, like West Bengal and Kerala, they are still hanging on to it. We have got to re-educate the people to forget these failed philosophies.
How Swamiji's speech at Chicago put a great significance to the freedom fighters movement of our country. What do you think, Dada?
See, Swamiji's speech was on a spiritual plane. The freedom fighters were fighting for freedom from British rule, and we got it. This brings to the question of, to the matter of Dr. G, that is Dr. Hedgewar's philosophy behind the founding of the RSS. Why did Dr. Hedgewar found the RSS? Because he said that this country will be free of British rule in a foreseeable future. But unless the Hindus unite and rediscover themselves, there will be no real freedom. So that is what he did. Swamiji's lecture was on the spiritual wealth of India, not for some British rule which was existing only for the last 200 years.
So I think that though so many questions are there, in fact, we have received more than 285 questions. And thank you, Tathagata. So with this, we'll conclude the question answer session.